He just wanted to read his daughter a story, in the one place they could still go for free. A quiet library, filled with the scent of old paper and dust motes, dancing in the afternoon light. What he didn't know was that the woman behind the counter wasn't just a librarian, she owned the entire publishing empire that printed most of the books on the shelves, and she was about to change his life forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment where in the world are you watching? From the chill of the November air clung to Liam's worn jacket, a persistent cold that seemed to seep straight through the fabric and into his bones. He held the heavy glass door of the public library open, his hand steady despite the tremor of exhaustion that ran through him. His daughter, Maya, darted inside, a bright spark of pink in a world of muted gray. Her laughter echoed for a brief moment in the grand quiet of the entrance, a sound so pure and full of life. It felt like a defiance against the weight of their world. This place was their sanctuary, the last true refuge in a life that had shrunk to the size of unpaid bills and half-empty cupboards the library asked for. Nothing. It didn't care that Liam's work boots were scuffed at the toes, or that Maya's coat was a hand-me-down from a cousin she'd never met here. Among the towering shelves and the hushed whispers of turning pages, they were just another father and daughter sharing a story. He followed her toward the children's section, his gaze sweeping over the familiar landscape of colorful book spines and miniature wooden chairs. It had been a long week. The carpentry job he'd been counting on had been pushed back again. The landlord had left another note, and the gnawing anxiety in his gut had become a constant companion. But for Maya, he pushed it all down. He had to be her calm, her steady, her anchor in a world that felt increasingly unsteady. She stopped in front of a large display, a new fantasy series with a shimmering holographic cover depicting a silver dragon soaring over a crystal castle. Her eyes widened with a kind of awe that was both beautiful and heartbreaking for him to witness. "Daddy, this one," she whispered, her small finger tracing the dragon's wing. "Can we read this one?" Liam's heart gave a familiar painful lurch. He knew that book, the price tag he'd seen in a bookstore window a few weeks ago, was more than their grocery budget for the entire week. He knelt beside her, forcing a smile that felt tight around the edges. "Let's see if it's available, sweetheart," he said, his voice gentle. He ran a hand over the smooth cover, then looked for a copy on the shelf. There were none, just an empty slot where it should have been. He walked to the checkout desk, a knot forming in his stomach. The woman behind the counter looked up as he approached her. Eyes were a soft, intelligent gray, and a few stray strands of auburn hair had escaped the loose bun at the nape of her neck. She wore a simple, gray cardigan, no makeup, and a quiet expression that seemed to hold a world of patience. Her name tag read, Anna, in simple black letters. She wasn't like the other librarians, who were often older, more flustered. She had a stillness about her, a composure that felt out of place among the clatter of book carts and ringing phones. "Excuse me," Liam said, his voice lower than he intended. "I was just wondering if you had any other copies of The Crystal Dragon. My daughter's got her." The heart set on it. Anna typed a few keystrokes into her computer, her fingers moving with quiet efficiency. She frowned slightly. "I'm sorry. It looks like our only copy was just checked out this morning, and we have a long hold list." Liam's shoulders sagged just a little, but he caught himself quickly. "No problem. Thanks anyway." He turned back to Maya, who was watching them with wide, hopeful eyes. He could see the disappointment beginning to cloud her face, and it was a look he was getting far too used to seeing. He crouched down again. "Hey, it's okay. We'll find another adventure. Right, there are a million dragons in here." But Maya's smile was gone, replaced by a quiet nod. She was trying to be brave for him. And that was what hurt them most. Anna watched them from behind the desk, her gaze lingering on the way Liam's hand rested on his daughter's shoulder, the gentle reassurance in his touch, the quiet dignity in his posture as he tried to shield her from a small, everyday heartbreak. She had seen 1,000 people come through these doors. But there was something about this man, something in his tired eyes, that spoke of a battle fought with grace and a love that was fierce and unyielding. She made a decision, then a small, quiet one, that would ripple outward in ways neither of them could yet imagine. "Excuse me." She called out, her voice, soft but clear. Liam turned surprised. She offered a small, hesitant smile. "You know, I think I remember seeing a donation copy in the back room. It might not be in the system yet. If you can, wait a minute. I can go check for you." Maya's head snapped up, her eyes bright with a renewed flicker of hope. Liam looked at Anna, a flicker of suspicion, warring with his gratitude. "You don't have to do that," he said. "We can find something else." "It's no trouble at all," Anna replied already, stepping out from behind the desk. "It's my job to find the right stories for the right people." She disappeared through a door marked "Staff Only," leaving Liam and Maya. In the echoing silence of the main hall, Liam didn't know what to think. Part of him was wary. Kindness, without a catch, had become a foreign language in his world. But another part of him felt a small, reluctant flutter of gratitude, a tiny pinprick of light. In a week that had been relentlessly dark, he looked down at Maya, who was now bouncing on the balls of her feet, her face a mask of pure anticipation. He ran a hand through her hair, and for the first time that day, a genuine smile touched his lips. It was just a book, he told himself. A small thing, but sometimes small things were all you had to hold on to, and right now it felt like everything. The door to the back room creaked open, and Anna emerged a moment later. Holding the book in her hands, it wasn't a worn donation copy, as she'd claimed. It was pristine, the cover gleaming under the library's fluorescent lights, the spine uncracked, the pages crisp and untouched. It was a first edition, a collector's item that had been sent to the library as a promotional gift from the publisher. Something meant for a display case, not for circulation. But she said none of that. She simply smiled and held it out to Liam. "Here we are," she said. "One lonely dragon in need of a good home." Maya let out a small gasp of pure delight, reaching for the book with both hands, as if it were made of spun glass. She hugged it to her chest, her face buried in the cover, a muffled "thank you" escaping from her lips. Liam stared at the book, then at Anna, his brow furrowed with a mixture of confusion and deep gratitude. "This looks brand new," he said, his voice quiet. Anna gave a slight shrug. "Sometimes we get lucky. People donate books they've never even opened. Please, enjoy it." She turned to Maya with a soft smile. "It looks like it found the right reader." Liam felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling so unfamiliar he almost didn't recognize it. It was more than just relief. It was the feeling of being seen, of being met with a kindness that didn't feel like pity. "Thank you," he said again, and this time the words felt heavier, more meaningful. "I don't know how to repay you," she shook her head, her gaze soft. "Just bring it back when you're done. That's all the payment a library ever needs." As he and Maya found a small table in the corner and he began to read the first chapter aloud, his voice steady and calm, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. He glanced over at the checkout desk, where Anna was now helping an elderly woman with a stack of large print mysteries. She moved with a quiet grace, a self-contained calm that seemed to emanate from her like a soft light. He didn't know who she was or why she'd gone out of her way for them. But as Maya leaned against his side, her eyes wide with the magic of a new story, he knew he wouldn't forget her. He read for over an hour, the world outside the library walls fading away with each turning page. The words of the story built a fortress around them, a place of magic and adventure, where dragons soared and heroes were brave, good always triumphed. In the end, it was a world away from their own, where the only dragons were bills, and the only battles were fought in the quiet desperation of a nearly empty bank account, But here, in the hushed sanctuary of the library, none of that mattered. All that existed was the story. His voice and the rapt attention of his daughter Maya was completely captivated, her chin resting in her hands, her gaze fixed on the illustrations as if she could will herself into them. She didn't fidget, she didn't interrupt, she just listened, her small body radiating a kind of peaceful contentment that Liam hadn't seen in her for weeks. He cherished these moments, these pockets of peace carved out of the chaos of their lives. They were the fuel that kept him going, the reason he got up every morning and faced the relentless tide of worry and responsibility. He would do anything to protect her joy, to keep that light in her eyes from dimming. He finished the 3rd chapter and paused, his throat dry from reading. He looked up and his eyes met Anna's from across the room. She was standing near a shelf of new arrivals, pretending to organize them, but he could tell she had been watching them. She quickly looked away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks as if he'd caught her in a private moment. Liam felt a strange flutter in his chest, an echo of something he hadn't felt in years, not since his wife had been alive, not since. The world had felt full of possibility. Instead of fraught with peril, he offered a small, hesitant smile, and to his surprise, she returned it. It was a brief exchange, a fleeting connection in the quiet of a Saturday afternoon, but it felt significant, like a silent acknowledgement of something shared, something unspoken. He didn't know her story. He didn't know why a woman with such a serene and almost regal bearing was working in a small-town library. But he found himself wanting to know more. He wanted to understand the quiet strength he saw in her eyes, the gentle kindness that seemed to be her native tongue. As they packed up to leave, Maya insisted on returning the book to Anna herself. She marched up to the desk, the heavy volume clutched in her arms, and placed it carefully on the counter. "Thank you for finding the dragon," she said, her voice full of a child's solemn gravity. Anna smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You are very welcome." "Did you enjoy the first part of his journey?" Maya nodded enthusiastically. It was the best story ever. Liam stood behind her, his hands in his pockets, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the library's heating system. "Thanks again," he said, meeting Anna's gaze. It meant a lot to her, to us. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary for a librarian and her patron. "No problem," she said softly. "It's what I'm here for." As they walked out into the fading afternoon light, the cold didn't seem to bite as sharply as before. Something had shifted, something small but profound, and Liam knew without a doubt that they would be back the following Saturday. The air was even colder, a brittle wind snapping at the edges of the city. Liam and Maya returned to the library, like pilgrims to a shrine. Maya was clutching a folded piece of construction paper in her mittened hand, a drawing she had spent all morning perfecting. It was a picture of a silver dragon with a smiling girl on its back flying over a building, with the word "Library" written in shaky crayon letters above the door. It was for Anna. She had declared a thank you for the story when they stepped inside. The familiar warmth and quiet wrapped around them like a comforting blanket. Liam scanned the room looking for her and felt a pang of disappointment when he saw an older woman with a stern bun behind the checkout desk. He told himself it didn't matter who was working, but the thought of not seeing Anna's calm smile left a small, hollow space in his chest. Maya, however, was undeterred. She marched straight to the children's section, her eyes scanning the aisles with a determined look. Liam followed, amused by her single-minded focus. They found Anna kneeling on the floor in a quiet corner, surrounded by a pile of picture books. She was patiently showing a little boy how to sound out a word, her voice a soft murmur in the quiet of the room. She looked up as they approached, and a genuine smile lit up her face. "Well, hello you two," she said, her eyes meeting Liam's for a brief moment before turning to Maya. "I was hoping I'd see you again." Maya beamed and held out her drawing. "This is for you." Anna took it with a reverence that made Liam's heart ache. She studied the drawing carefully, her fingers tracing the crayon lines of the dragon's wings. "Oh, Maya, this is beautiful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. I'm going to hang it by my desk so I can see it every day." Maya puffed out her chest with pride. Her mission accomplished. Liam stood watching them, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. He was struck again by Anna's grace, the way she knelt on the floor to be at a child's level, the genuine warmth in her smile, the way she made Maya feel like the most important person in the world. He realized he was staring, and quickly looked away, feeling a blush creep up his neck. It had been so long since he'd felt this kind of connection with anyone. This easy camaraderie, this spark of something new and hopeful. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Anna stood up, brushing off her skirt. Her eyes met his again, this time with a hint of amusement, as if she knew exactly what he was thinking. So she said, her voice light, "Are we continuing our journey with the crystal dragon today, or are we charting a new course?" Maya looked up at Liam, her eyes pleading the rhyme. "Dragon, please." Liam chuckled. Of course the dragon, and so they settled into their usual corner, and as he began to read, Liam felt a sense of peace settle over him, a feeling of rightness that had been absent from his life for too long. Didn't know what this was. This strange pull toward the quiet librarian with the sad but kind eyes. But he knew one thing for certain. This library was no longer just a sanctuary. It was starting to feel like a destination over to back. The next few weeks, the library became their weekend ritual, a fixed point in a life of variables. Liam looked forward to it with an eagerness that surprised him. He told himself it was for Maya, but he knew that was only part of the truth. I looked forward to seeing Anna, to the brief exchanges at the checkout desk, the shared smiles across the quiet room, the silent acknowledgement that they were both there carrying their own unseen burdens. Their conversations were always brief, carefully orbiting the surface of their lives. He learned that she was new to town, having moved a few months ago for a change of pace. She learned that he was a carpenter, a woodworker, who specialized in custom furniture, a trade that had become a luxury in a world of flat-packed disposable goods. He didn't tell her that his workshop now sat mostly silent, the tools gathering a thin layer of dust, the orders having dried up months ago. He didn't want her pity, he just wanted her to see him as he was a man who worked with his hands, a man who loved his daughter, a man who was doing his best. She saw more than he realized. One Saturday, he came in with a small wooden bird clutched in his hand, its wings carved with intricate detail, the wood smooth and warm to the touch. He'd made it for Maya, a small token to apologize for a dinner of canned soup and crackers the night before. When he thought she was asleep, she had overheard him on the phone with the credit card company. His voice low and strained. He found the bird on her bedside table the next morning, untouched. Maya. He didn't want it. He knew why it was a symbol of their struggle, a reminder of the things he couldn't give her. He brought it to the library, not knowing what else to do with it. Anna was at the front desk. When he walked in, she looked up, and her smile faltered when she saw the expression on his face. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice full of a concern that felt both comforting and invasive. He placed the bird on the counter, his hand trembling slightly. "Just a project." "That didn't turn out right," he said, his voice rough. Anna picked it up, her fingers tracing the delicate carving. "This is beautiful, Liam," she said, her eyes searching his. "Why would you say it didn't turn out right?" "Because it was supposed to be a gift." He admitted, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "It was supposed to make her happy, but it just reminded her of what we don't have." Anna looked at him, her expression full of a deep and aching empathy. She didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. She just stood there in the quiet space of his confession, holding the small wooden bird like it was something precious, something sacred. She looked from the bird to his hands, calloused and marked with the small nicks and scars of his trade. Then she looked into his eyes, and for the first time, Liam felt like someone saw the whole of him. The artist, the father, the man who was trying so hard to hold his world together with nothing but love and splintered wood. And in her gaze he didn't find pity, he found respect. And that was a gift more valuable than any he could have carved. The air in the library that afternoon felt heavy thick with unspoken words. Liam had retreated to his usual corner with Maya trying to lose himself in the fantasy world of the crystal dragon, but his mind kept drifting back to the front desk, to the small wooden bird, and to the woman who now held a piece of his story in her hands. He could feel her gaze on him, occasionally, a quiet, unwavering attention that was both unsettling and deeply comforting. He hadn't meant to be so vulnerable, to let the carefully constructed walls around his life crumble like that, but there was something about Anna that disarmed him, a quiet strength that invited honesty, a gentleness that made it feel safe to be broken for a moment. When it was time to leave, he approached the desk with a sense of dread. He expected her to be different, to treat him with a careful distance, now that she had glimpsed the reality of his struggle, but she wasn't. She looked up as he approached, and her smile was the same, warm and genuine. The wooden bird sat on the counter beside her computer, a small sentinel of hope in a world of overdue notices and budget cuts. "I was thinking," Liam started, his voice a little shaky. "I'd like you to have it if you want it." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, Liam, I couldn't. It's too beautiful." He shook his head. "It belongs here more than it belongs with me." Anna picked up the bird, her fingers closing around it gently. "Well," then she said, her voice soft, "thank you. I'll treasure it." She paused for a moment, then said something that caught him completely off guard. "I know you're a carpenter. I have a friend who's renovating an old house just outside of town. She's been looking for someone to do some custom shelving and cabinetry work, someone with a real artist's touch." Liam's heart gave a sharp, painful thud. A job, a real job, the kind he hadn't had in months, the kind that could mean the difference between keeping their apartment and losing it. He tried to keep his voice, even to mask the desperate hope that surged through him. "Really?" he asked. Anna nodded. "I can give her your number if you'd like. No promises, of course, but she trusts my judgment." His mind reeled, a dozen emotions colliding at once. Gratitude, hope, suspicion. Was this pity? Was this charity? He looked at her, trying to read her expression, but all he saw was a genuine desire to help, an offer made not out of a sense of superiority, but out of a shared humanity. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Anna. I don't know what to say." She smiled, and the warmth in her eyes was so real it almost made him believe that things might actually be okay. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "Just go build something beautiful." As he and Maya walked home, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows behind them, Liam clutched the piece of paper with the phone number on it like it was a winning lottery ticket. He didn't know if anything would come of it, but for the first time in a very long time he felt the stirrings of something he had thought was long dead hope, and it was a feeling that was as terrifying as it was welcome. The phone call felt like a dream. Liam had stood in his small workshop, the scent of sawdust and old varnish hanging in the air, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs as he dialed the number Anna had given him. He had expected a secretary, an assistant, a gatekeeper, of some kind. But a woman had answered on the second ring, her voice warm and direct. She introduced herself as Eleanor, and after a few minutes of polite conversation, she asked him to meet her at the house. The following day he had spent the rest of the evening in a state of suspended disbelief, pacing the small apartment, unable to sit still. Maya had watched him with a curious smile, finally asking if he was going to wear a hole in the floor. He had just laughed and scooped her up into a hug, feeling a lightness he hadn't felt in months. Now he stood in front of the house, a grand old Victorian that had clearly seen better days. Its paint was peeling, the porch sagged slightly, and the windows were clouded with dust. But Liam saw past the neglect. He saw the good bones, the solid structure, the echoes of a craftsmanship that was all but extinct in the modern world. He saw potential. He saw beauty. He saw a project that made his hands itch with anticipation. The door opened, and a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile greeted him. She was older than him, maybe in her late 50s, with silver hair, cut in a stylish bob, and an easy laugh that put him instantly at ease. This was Eleanor, Anna's friend. They walked through the house, Eleanor pointing out the areas she wanted to renovate: the kitchen, the library, the grand staircase. Liam listened intently, his mind already working, sketching out designs, imagining the feel of the wood under his hands. He was so engrossed in the conversation that he didn't notice the other person in the house until they stepped into the library, a vast room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a large bay window. Overlooking a wild, overgrown garden, a young woman stood by the window, her back to them, staring out at the view. She was tall and slender, with the same auburn hair as Anna tied back in a simple, elegant knot. Eleanor smiled. "Ah, there you are. Analyze. This is Liam the carpenter. I told you about." The woman turned, and Liam's world tilted on its axis. It was Anna, but not Anna. She wore a simple but expensive-looking silk blouse and tailored trousers, not the cozy cardigans he was used to seeing her in. Her posture was more formal, more guarded, and her eyes, when they met his, held a flicker of something he couldn't quite name: panic maybe, or regret. Annalise, he repeated the name, feeling foreign on his tongue. "Anna," she corrected, her voice a little too quiet, a little too quick. "Anna is what my friends call me." Eleanor smiled at them, blissfully unaware of the undercurrent of tension that had suddenly filled the room. "Well, I'll leave you two to discuss the due day details," she said. "I have a call to make." She disappeared down the hallway, leaving Liam and Anna alone in the vast empty room. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy with unspoken questions. Liam stared at her, trying to reconcile. The woman in front of him, with the quiet librarian, he had come to know and adore. "What's going on?" "Anna," he asked, his voice low and steady. She looked away, her gaze falling to the floor. "I should have told you," she whispered. "I wanted to." Told me what? His voice was sharper. Now, an edge of betrayal creeping in. "That this is my house. That Eleanor is not just my friend. She's my assistant. That my name is not just Anna. It's Annalise Vance." Liam's breath caught in his throat. Vance, as in Vance Publishing. The name was a titan in the literary world, a global empire built on stories. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. "So this job," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Was this all some kind of charity case? Some project for the lonely billionaire to feel good about herself? "No," she said, her head snapping up, her eyes flashing with a pain that was so real it cut through his anger. "I just wanted to help you. I saw how talented you were, how much you loved your daughter. I just wanted to give you a chance, but you lied to me." He said the words, a raw wound between them. "You let me believe you were someone you're not." "I never lied about who I am," she said, her voice breaking. "I just didn't tell you my name. The name doesn't matter. It's everything." He shot back. "It's the reason you can buy and sell people like me without a second. I thought it's the reason you can play librarian in a small town while the rest of us are fighting to keep the lights on." He turned to leave, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. He couldn't be here, not now, not in this house, built on a foundation of lies and half-truths. "Liam," he called after him, her voice a desperate plea, "please don't go." But he was already gone, the sound of his footsteps echoing on the polished hardwood floors, a final mournful rhythm of a trust that had been shattered into a million pieces. The drive home was a blur of anger and humiliation. Liam's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles were white. The image of Anna, or Annalise, as he now knew her, stood in that grand, empty library, a world away from the cozy corners and hushed whispers of the place where they had met. He felt like a fool, a pawn in a game. He didn't even know he was playing. She had seen his struggle, his poverty, his quiet desperation, and she had offered him a lifeline. But the lifeline was attached to a world he could never be a part of, a world of wealth and power and secrets. When he got back to the apartment, Maya was waiting for him, her face bright with anticipation. "Did you get the job, Daddy?" she asked, her voice full of a hopeful innocence that twisted the knife in his gut. He couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. Not yet. He just shook his head and sank onto the couch, his body heavy with the weight of a hope that had been so cruelly snatched away. He spent the rest of the day in a fog of disbelief. He replayed every conversation, every shared smile, every moment of connection with Annalise, searching for the cracks. The signs he had missed. Had it all been a performance? A carefully orchestrated act of charity? Had she been laughing at him behind her sad, kind eyes? The thought was a poison, seeping into the spaces where trust and hope had begun to bloom. He felt a bitter resentment rise in him, a resentment not just at her, but at the world that created such vast and unbridgeable divides between people, the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, the givers and the takers. He had always known which side he was on, but he had never felt the sting of it so sharply as he did now. He had allowed himself to believe that they were just two people, two souls connecting in the quiet spaces of a shared humanity. But he had been wrong. They were not just two people, they were two worlds colliding. And he was the one who was left to pick up the pieces of the wreckage later that evening. As Maya slept soundly in her bed, he walked into his workshop, the scent of sawdust and wood glue a familiar comfort in the chaos of his thoughts. He picked up a piece of unfinished wood, its grain, a beautiful, intricate pattern of lines and swirls. He ran his hand over its smooth surface, feeling the potential within it, the story it held. He had always believed that he could create beauty out of simple raw materials, that he could take something humble and transform it into something of value, but now he wondered if some things were just too broken to be fixed, if some divides were just too wide to be bridged. He put the wood down and sat on his workbench. His head in his hands, the silence of the workshop was a heavy blanket, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. He had lost more than just a job. He had lost the fragile belief that someone could see him for who he was, not for what he lacked, and that was a loss that felt far more profound than any financial setback. The next day dawned gray and sullen, a mirror of Liam's mood. He went through the motions of the morning with a mechanical numbness, making Maya breakfast, packing her lunch, walking her to school. His smile felt like a mask, his words hollow echoes of a cheerfulness he no longer possessed. He didn't go to the library. He couldn't face the thought of seeing her there, of the polite charade they would both have to perform. He couldn't bear the thought of Maya running to her with a bright smile, oblivious to the chasm that now separated them. Instead, he returned to his workshop and tried to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of his work. He picked up a piece of cherry wood and began to carve his hands, moving with a practiced ease that belied the turmoil in his bored mind. He worked for hours, the pile of wood shavings at his feet growing into a small mountain, but the work brought him no solace, no peace. The image of Annalise's face, her eyes full of a pain that had seemed so genuine, haunted him. Had he been too harsh? Had he misjudged her? Had he let his own pride and insecurity cloud his judgment? The questions circled in his mind, a relentless carousel of doubt and regret. He didn't want to believe that she was cruel or manipulative. He wanted to believe that she was the person he had thought. She was the kind, gentle woman who had found a lost book for a little girl, who had treasured a small wooden bird, who had seen the artist in him when all he saw was failure. But how could he reconcile that woman with the heiress of a publishing empire, a woman who lived in a world so far removed from his own that it might as well have been another planet he put down? his tools, and stared at the half-finished carving in his hands. It was a bird, its wings outstretched as if in flight, but it felt incomplete, lifeless, a symbol of a hope that had been grounded before it ever had a chance to soar. He realized with a sinking heart that his anger was not just directed at her, it was directed at himself, for allowing himself to be so vulnerable, for daring to believe that a quiet librarian with sad eyes could be the answer to a prayer he hadn't even realized he'd been whispering. Annalise sat in the vast empty library of her home, the silence, a deafening roar in her ears. The books that had once been her refuge now felt like silent accusers, their spines a colorful chorus of stories that felt 1,000,000 miles away from her own. She had replayed her conversation with Liam 100 times in her mind, his words a relentless echo of her failure. "You lied to me," he had said, and the accusation was a dagger in her heart. Because it was true, she hadn't lied with her words, but she had lied with her silence. She had let him believe she was someone she wasn't, not out of malice, but out of a desperate yearning to be seen for who she was. What she was. She had come to this small town to escape the gilded cage of her life, to shed the weight of the Vance name and the expectations that came with it. She had wanted to be just Anna, a woman who found solace in the quiet order of a Beijing library, a woman who could connect with people on a human level without the filter of wealth and power. And, for a brief, a beautiful moment, she had found that with Liam and Maya, they had seen her, not the heiress, not the brand, but the person she had forgotten she could be. They had offered her a glimpse of a life that was real and honest and full of a quiet joy. She had never known, but she had ruined it. Her fear of her own identity had created the very chasm she had been so desperate to avoid. She had let the lie of omission fester until it had poisoned the fragile trust that had begun to grow between them. She looked around the room at the priceless first editions, the leather-bound classics, the monuments to a literary legacy she had inherited but never truly felt a part of, and she realized with a sickening clarity that she was more a prisoner in this house of stories than she had ever been in the boardrooms of Vance Publishing. She had surrounded herself with narratives, but she had forgotten how to write her own one with truth and courage and a willingness to be vulnerable, even if it meant getting hurt. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't erase the lie, but he could try to bridge the divide she had created. She couldn't force Liam to trust her again, but she could show him that her intentions had been true, that the kindness she had offered had come from a place of genuine connection, not condescending charity. She stood up a new resolve, hardening her features. She would not let fear write the final chapter of this story. She would go to him, not as Annalise Vance the heiress, but as Anna, the woman who had fallen in love with a carpenter and his daughter in the quiet corners of a public library, and she would fight for the one story that had ever truly mattered to her. The days that followed were a study in quiet misery. Liam avoided the library like it was a place kind of contagion. He took Maya to the park, to the duck pond, anywhere but the one place she most wanted to go. She didn't complain, but he saw the question in her eyes, the unspoken longing for the friend she had made among the bookshelves. Threw himself into his work, taking on small repair jobs that barely paid the bills, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from dwelling on what he had lost, but the ghost of Annalise lingered in the scent of sawdust in the pages of the books he read to Maya at night, in the hollow echo of his own heart. He was a man adrift, lost in a sea of his own. Making one afternoon, he found Maya sitting on the floor of her room, surrounded by crayons and paper. She was drawing a picture of a large, ornate house, with a sad-looking girl in one of the windows. Beside the house, she had drawn a small workshop with a man, inside, carving a bird. Liam's heart ached as he looked at the drawing. A child's simple interpretation of a tragedy she couldn't possibly understand. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice gentle. Maya looked up at him, her eyes full of a wisdom that was far beyond her years. a story about a princess in a castle, and a woodcarver who was too scared to visit her. She said. Liam sank to the woodcarver floor. Beside her, his throat tight with emotion. "Why is he scared?" he asked, his voice a whisper. "Because he thinks he's not good enough for the princess." Maya said simply, "But he is. She just wants him to be her friend." Liam looked at the drawing again, at the sad little girl in the window and the lonely man in his workshop, and he saw not a princess and a woodcarver, but two people who were trapped in their own self-imposed prisons, two people who were letting fear and pride stand in the way of a connection that was as rare and beautiful as a perfectly carved bird. He realized in that moment that Maya was right. He had been a coward. He had let his own insecurities and past wounds dictate his actions. He had punished Annalise for a crime she had not intended to commit, and in doing so he had hurt not just himself, but his daughter as well. He knew what he had to do. He had to go to her. He had to apologize. He had to be the man Maya believed him to be, the man who was brave enough to fight for the stories that mattered the most. Annalise stood on the porch of her grand old house, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow on the peeling paint and weathered wood. She held a small wooden bird in her hand, its smooth surface a comforting weight against her palm. She had been standing there for a long time, staring out at the street, hoping for a sign, a glimpse of a familiar face, a reason to believe that it wasn't. Too late, she had tried to go back to the library, to her quiet life as Anna, but it felt like a costume she could no longer wear. She had been pretending to be someone she wasn't, and now she was just a woman caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. She heard the sound of footsteps on the sidewalk, and her heart gave a hopeful leap. She looked up and saw Liam walking toward her, his face a mask of uncertainty, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his worn jacket. He stopped at the foot of the walkway, his eyes meeting hers across the overgrown lawn. The silence between them was a heavy thing, a tapestry woven with threads of anger, hurt, and a deep, unspoken longing. "I'm sorry," Liam said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was wrong." Annalise took a step forward, her hand tightening around the wooden bird. "You were hurt," he shook his head. "I was a coward. I let my pride get in the way. I let my fear of being not good enough blind me to who you really are." "And who is that?" she asked, her voice a whisper. He looked at her, and for the first time since he had learned her true name, he saw not the heiress, not the brand, but the woman he had fallen for, the woman with the sad, kind eyes and the gentle smile, the woman who had seen the artist in him when all he saw was failure. "You're the person who found a lost book for a little girl," he said, his voice gaining strength. "You're the person who treasured a small wooden bird. You're the person who believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself." Annalise's eyes filled with tears. She held out the bird to him, a silent offering of forgiveness and hope. "I never stopped believing in you, Liam," she said. He walked up the path, and Allos stood in front of her, the space between them crackling with an energy that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He took the bird from her hand, their fingers brushing in a touch that sent a jolt of electricity through him. "Can we start over?" he asked, his voice full of a raw vulnerability he had never shown anyone before. "Can we find a way to bridge this divide?" She smiled, a real smile, a smile that reached her eyes and lit them up from within. "I think," she said, her voice full of I hope that mirrored his own. "I think we already are." They stood on the porch of the old Victorian house, the world around them fading into the soft glow of twilight. The air was still thick with unspoken apologies and unresolved complexities. But for the first time in a long time, it was also filled with the promise of a new beginning, a story that was not yet written, a story that they would write together. Liam looked at Annalise, her face softened by the dying light, her eyes reflecting the nascent stars that were beginning to pepper the sky, and he felt a sense of peace settle over him, a peace that was deeper and more profound than any he had ever known. This wasn't about forgiveness or second chances. was about acceptance. It was about recognizing that they were both flawed and broken in their own ways, but that their broken pieces fit together in a way that made them whole. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice a low rumble in the quiet of the evening. "I don't know how to be in your world, how to navigate the complexities of who you are." She reached out and took his hand, her touch a gentle anchor in the sea of his uncertainty. "You don't have to be in my world, Liam," she said softly. "And I don't have to be in yours. We can build our own world. A world where names and money and status don't matter. A world where all that matters is what's in our hearts." He looked down at their intertwined hands, his calloused and scarred, hers, smooth and delicate, and he saw not a symbol of their differences, but a testament to their connection. They were two people from opposite ends of the spectrum, but their souls spoke the same language, the language of love, of loss, of a deep and abiding yearning for something real and honest in a world that was so often neither. "Let's go see Maya," he said, his voice full of a new resolve. "She deserves to see her princess and her woodcarver together again." Annalise smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I think she'd like that," she said, as they walked hand in hand down the quiet street, the lights from the houses around them casting a warm and welcoming glow. Liam knew that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges and obstacles and moments of doubt, but for the first time, in a very long time, he was not afraid. He was ready to face whatever came their way, as long as she was by his side, because he had finally understood that home was not a place, it was a person, and he had found his home in the heart of a quiet librarian who had shown him that the greatest stories are not found in books, but in the brave and messy and beautiful connections we make with one another. The library felt different when they walked in together. The next Saturday, it was still the same quiet sanctuary, filled with the scent of old paper and the soft rustle of turning pages. But for Liam, the air was charged with a new energy, a sense of possibility that had been absent for too long. Maya darted ahead of them, a whirlwind of pink and joyful energy, her laughter a bright melody in the hushed symphony of the room. She ran straight to the children's section, her eyes scanning the shelves for her beloved crystal dragon. Annalise watched her go, a soft smile playing on her lips. She turned to Liam, her eyes full of a warmth that made his heart skip a beat. "Ready for our next chapter?" she asked. He smiled back. A real smile, a smile that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners, in a way that was both boyish and world-weary. "I think so," he said, "as long as you're the one." Turning the pages, they found a cozy corner near a sunny window and settled in for the afternoon, as Liam read the story of the brave little dragon who dared to be different. He felt a sense of peace wash over him. He was no longer a man adrift in a sea of uncertainty. He was a man who had found his anchor, his true north. He looked at Annalise, who was listening with rapt attention, her head tilted, her eyes full of a wonder that mirrored his daughter's, and he knew that he was the home he had found his story, his happily ever after. Not in a grand castle or a publishing empire, but in the quiet corners of a public library, with a woman who had taught him that the greatest wealth is not found in what you own, but in what you are willing to give away. The renovation of the old Victorian house became a project of love, a tangible symbol of the world they were building together. Liam's workshop, which had sat silent for so long, was now filled with the cheerful hum of saws and the rhythmic tap of his hammer. He worked with a renewed passion, a sense of purpose that had been rekindled by the fire of Annalise's belief in him. He poured his heart and soul into every piece of custom cabinetry, every hand-carved mantelpiece, every intricate detail of the restoration. He was not just building a house, he was building a home, a sanctuary for the three of them, a place where they could be themselves, free from the expectations, judgments of the outside world. Annalise was there every step of the way. She traded her silk blouses for paint-splattered jeans, her elegant heels for sturdy work boots. She learned how to sand wood, how to mix paint, how to hold a nail gun without flinching. She was a quick study, her hands nimble and her mind sharp, but more than that, she was a willing partner, a co-creator in their shared vision. She brought a sense of style and elegance to the project, an eye for color and texture that complemented Liam's rustic craftsmanship together. They were a symphony of contrasts, a blend of old-world charm and modern sophistication, a testament to the idea that beauty is often found in the most unexpected of pairings. Maya was their official supervisor. She would sit for hours on a drop cloth, her coloring book spread out around her, offering her unsolicited advice on everything from paint colors to the placement of doorknobs. She was the heart of W. The project, the sun around which their little world revolved. Her laughter was the soundtrack to their days. Her joy, the fuel that kept them going one afternoon as they were putting the finishing touches on the library, a room that had once been a symbol of their division, but was now a testament to their unity. Maya brought Annalise a drawing. It was a picture of the three of them standing in front of the newly renovated house, their hands intertwined, their faces beaming with, quote, happiness above them. She had written in her childish scrawl, "The Vance Morgan Library of Love." Annalise's eyes filled with tears. As she looked at the drawing, she hugged Maya tightly, her heart overflowing with a love so pure and profound. It took her breath away. She looked at Liam over Maya's head, her eyes conveying a message that needed no words. This was it. This was the life she had always dreamed of, a life filled with love and laughter and the quiet joy of building something beautiful with the people who mattered most. The day they moved into the house was a day of celebration, a culmination of months of hard work and a testament to the power of love to heal and transform. They didn't have a big party or a grand unveiling, just a simple gathering of close friends and family. Eleanor was there, her face beaming with a pride that was almost maternal. She hugged Annalise tightly and whispered in her ear, "You found your story, sweetheart, and it's a beautiful one." Liam's friends from his old neighborhood were there too, their initial skepticism having melted away in the face of Annalise's genuine warmth and down-to-earth nature. They clapped him on the back, their eyes full of a respect that went beyond his craftsmanship. They saw the happiness in his eyes, the peace in his soul, and they knew that he had found something special, something real. But the most important guest of honor was Maya. She danced through the rooms of the new house, her laughter echoing off the freshly painted walls, her joy a contagious energy that filled every corner of the space. This was her castle, her kingdom, her happily ever after, and she was the princess who had brought her woodcarver and her librarian together to create a world of their own making that evening. As the last of the guests departed, Liam and Annalise stood on the porch, hand in hand, watching the stars come out in the Bracian. Clear night sky. The air was crisp and cool, the scent of pine and wood smoke, a familiar comfort. They were no longer two people from different worlds. They were two souls who had found each other in the most unexpected of places and had built a bridge of love and trust that was strong enough to withstand any storm. "What's next?" Liam asked, his voice a low rumble in the quiet of the night. Annalise leaned her head on his shoulder, her eyes fixed on the constellations above. "I don't know," she said softly, "but for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of the unknown. As long as I have you and Maya by my side, I know that we can face anything that comes our way." He turned to her, his eyes full of a love so deep and abiding. It took her breath away. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently caressing her cheeks. "I love you, Annalise Vance," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you more than words can say." She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "And I love you, Liam Morgan," she whispered, "more than all the books in the world." They sealed their love with a kiss that was not just a promise of a future together, but a celebration of the journey that had brought them to this moment, a journey of love, loss, and the redemptive power of a shared story. A story that was just beginning years later. On a crisp autumn afternoon, an older and wiser Maya sat on the porch of the grand old Victorian house, a book in her lap and a smile on her face. The house was no longer a symbol of division or wealth. It was a home filled with the echoes of laughter, the scent of home-cooked meals, and the quiet joy of a family that had been forged in the crucible of love and adversity. Her father Liam was in his workshop, the familiar hum of his tools, a comforting soundtrack to the day he was a master craftsman. Now, his work sought after by clients from all over the country, but he was still the same humble, kind man who had taught her that the greatest strength is found in gentleness. Her mother Annalise was in the library, the room that had once been her prison but was now her sanctuary. She had transformed the Vance Publishing empire into a force for good, a company that valued stories over profits and people over power. She was a titan of industry, but she was also a woman who still found solace in the quiet corners of a library, a woman who never forgot the power of a single book to change a life. Maya closed her book and looked out at the world, her heart full of a gratitude that was as deep and abiding as the love that surrounded her. She was a product of two worlds, a blend of rustic charm and refined elegance, a testament to the idea that love knows no boundaries, no class distinctions, no barriers that cannot be overcome. She was the living embodiment of a story that had been written not with ink and paper, but with courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to believe in the power of a shared dream. She stood up and walked into the house, her footsteps a soft rhythm on the polished hardwood floors. She found her parents in the kitchen, their arms wrapped around each other, their faces glowing with a love that had only deepened with the passing of years. They were no longer a woodcarver and a librarian. They were just Liam and Annalise, two people who had found their happily ever after in the most unexpected of places. And Maya, as she looked at them, knew that she was the luckiest girl in the world, because she was a part of their story, a story that was more beautiful and more magical than any fairy tale she had ever read a story of. Love of hope, and of the enduring power of a single quiet act of kindness to change the world one heart at a time. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and pink, a final breathtaking flourish at the end of a perfect day. Liam, Annalise, and Maya sat on the porch, swing their bodies, a comfortable tangle of limbs, and loved their laughter, a soft melody that drifted on the evening breeze. They were not just a family, they were a legacy, a testament to the idea that the greatest stories are not the ones we read, but the ones we live, and their story was a masterpiece, a timeless classic, that would be told and retold for generations to come, a story of a carpenter, a librarian, and a little girl who had taught the world that love is the most powerful magic of all. And as the first star of the evening appeared in the twilight sky, a tiny diamond of hope in the vast expanse of the universe, they made a silent wish, a wish for more stories, more laughter, more love, a wish for a future that was as bright and as beautiful as the love that had brought them all together. And in the quiet of that perfect moment, they knew without a doubt that their wish would come true. Because they had found their magic not in a crystal dragon or a publishing empire, but in the simple and profound truth that love, when it is real and honest and true, is the one thing that can conquer all.